And so Opolis is really about disintermediating employment. It's about giving the controls of employment to the individual contributors, to the workers, without giving up their independence and without creating this power hierarchy or this economics hierarchy that it currently exists.
DAOs in Web3 are promoting a culture of freelancing and co-employment. In the post-COVID era, remote working culture has accelerated this trend in a significant manner. However, there are certain pitfalls in managing this setup, out of which employment benefits remain one of the prominent issues. Thus, the need of an organization to streamline payroll management and employee benefits. Opolis aims to provide structured employee benefits to people who work for distributed organizations like Dows. Opolis offers the freedom and flexibility of being independent while also maintaining the security of a traditional corporate job. They are at the forefront of ensuring that platforms are owned by users who thereby aim to create value for each other in the community. Today we have John with us. John is the founder of Opolis and steward of EthDenver. He has been in the talent acquisition and HR tech space for over 15 years now. He is driven to bring a systemic change to the employment industry and hence involved in Opolis to create a new system of democratizing employment. We are enthralled to have you with us today, John. Welcome to CuratedX and really look forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Lovely. Let's get the ball rolling. And if you can tell us a little bit about Opolis and how did this idea come to you?
Yeah, so I've been in the employment and HR tech space for a really long time. And it's actually closer to 20 years that I've been an entrepreneur in the space. It's actually been 20 years. And I've seen a lot. And, you know, I've always sort of noticed that there was a little bit of, or a lot of imbalance in both power and economic distribution in the traditional corporate-based employment systems. And so back in 2005, I first said the words, we're going to democratize employment. Now, in the context in which I was playing at that time, there's no way I could have done it. I just didn't know that I didn't know what I didn't know. So the next 10 years or so was really about experimentation and trying to figure out like, okay, how do we, create better outcomes for workers? How do we, there's a lot of questions around how do you do this? But most of those efforts didn't end up yielding the results that we wanted because the game design is actually terminally flawed. And that's because so one of the big concepts of Web3 is decentralization. Well, employment is entirely centralized.
Right.
Because we depend on corporations. So you have a trusted third-party intermediary providing permission for you to get a paycheck and to get healthcare and to get these other things. So as I was exploring Web3 back in 2015, so the story of how I got into crypto is a really interesting one because I randomly met Vitalik Buterin's father at a conference in 2014, like January 2014. So Ethereum wasn't even a thing yet. It was the beginnings of a thing, but it wasn't really a thing yet. And I didn't really understand what a next generation smart contract ecosystem meant. I had no idea. But then when I got it, I was like, oh, this isn't about like technology to make things more efficient like Web 2. This is like completely reorganizing the way that and then it clicked. I was like, we could actually like disintermediate employment and we could do like all this other things. Like my whole thinking took a giant leap. And so Opolis is really about disintermediating employment. It's about giving the controls of employment to the individual contributors, to the workers, without giving up their independence and without creating this power hierarchy or this economics hierarchy that it currently exists, right? It's very paternalistic employment nowadays. And if you look at the behaviors of the youngest population of workers, the Gen Zers, they don't want the W-2 jobs. They're not actually taking W-2 jobs. They're working independently right out the box, and they actively say no, like, no thanks. And it's because the social contracts and the values of workers has shifted entirely away from the safety and security, which is what old school employment is based on. It's not even true anymore, but that's the idea. And they want freedom and flexibility. So we're now giving them what safety and security you can get from a traditional org, which is getting healthcare benefits, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, et cetera, and all the different boxes for statutory compliance that you need. And we're giving you the freedom and flexibility. So it's both, right? So it's threading a very delicate needle and it fills a big hole in Web3, because Web3 is trying to figure out how to do this. And DAOs are looking at, well, maybe we should just get a legal entity and we should just employ all of our people and all this. It's like, no, that kind of defeats the whole point, doesn't it? Like, aren't you just going to be a corporation then? And they go, oh, kind of, yeah. So anyway, Opolis is like it's a next generation employment platform. It's a public utility infrastructure for employment. The idea is to operate on a global scale. So we don't limit people's jurisdiction on where they can work or with whom they can work or from where they can work. They can work from where, with whom, and how much they choose. So that's the long version. Sorry about that.
Absolutely. It was very interesting and very intriguing, actually, how you bring together the two boxes of ensuring the security and safety, as well as ensuring that, yes, freedom and flexibility is at the crux with the generation right now.
It has to be. You can't give up your freedom in exchange for, table stakes stuff like healthcare insurance.
Definitely.
Like that concept is just way outdated. And even just W-2 paychecks. I mean, if you think about it in the US, if you don't have a W-2, if you don't have consistent income, if you're not plugged in, you can't even rent an apartment. Especially crypto people that have like a bunch, here's my MetaMask. It's got $50,000 of value in it, but they're like, well, we don't take that. Like, where's your bank accounts and where's your W-2 and where's your income? And they're like, oh, I don't have any of that, right? So they don't feel like they feel like they don't fit in. So Opolis normalizes all of that, gives them the path to be legitimized and to professionalize themselves, but they don't have to give up their Web3 stuff.
Absolutely. I think very, very interesting how you mentioned and how you bring the two worlds together, which is the need of the hour. And as the Web3 ecosystem grows, that is something which is going to be required. So just taking on from there, right, employee payroll and a host of other benefits, including healthcare, give a sense of comfort and security to any employee. So I would love to know what all benefits are covered under the Opolis membership program from you.
Yeah, so pretty much any benefit that you would typically expect is part of the regular W-2 employment world. So it's the big one in the US especially is healthcare insurance. So we're able to provide people healthcare insurance 20 to 50% less in cost than what you would have to get on the state exchange. So typically people working independently, that's the option.
Yeah.
That's what they get to do, right? So there is no other option for people working independently. So we can give them better care, national coverage, not this, well, it's only in the area code or in the state of, where you live that's in network. So if I travel to a conference and get sick or something, I'm not covered in network and it's much more expensive for me. You don't have to deal with any of that stuff. So we deal with currently the doctor network is Cigna. So it's a top 3 doctor network. It's the biggest doctor network you can buy with Cigna. We're self-insured. So like we have a lot of control over like how we manage plans and what we pick and how we design things, because we're designed by independent workers for independent workers. So healthcare is probably the biggest one that we see in the US, especially. In addition to that, there's vision and dental. So those things are there too. And then things like long-term, short-term disability, life insurance, workman's comp, unemployment insurance, retirement accounts, both traditional sort of like Vanguard type 401k with, you can participate in the safe harbor match if you want. Or you can do a crypto-friendly IRA. You can take your money and put it into crypto in an IRA that's self-directed, right? So we give people a lot of options. So like it's a one-stop, right? So like you don't have to go piece all this together from different places. As a member of Opolis, we've already negotiated all this stuff for you. And I'm a member too, right? So this isn't just like us and you. This is not us and them. We're all part of this, right? So I have the same healthcare as everybody else does because we're member owned. And that's the big difference, I think. The biggest difference between what we do is we don't see ourselves as a service provider. We're a community providing services to our community of communities. It's a completely different approach to building, scaling, accruing value, and then also creating services that are meaningful. Because like we only build things that people want. You know, it's not about trying to make money. Most of what we build will probably be free from our view if we build it. There will be some exceptions to that because it costs money to do certain things that we'll need to integrate. But like for the most part, it's all about maintaining this sort of member first approach, right? But all the benefits, you like when I say we replicate employment down to the exact benefits that you would normally have in a W-2 job, that's the point. We do it so there's no difference, right? But instead of some other third party giving you permission because they have to permission you by employing you, now you can employ yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that is the very important part of decentralization of Web3, where you show that community behavior not by doing a me and a you, but it is we that moves together. So I think that's the most important part of it, like you said as well.
Exactly. It's very subtle, but like Web3 isn't just tech. The tech in Web3, smart contracts, cryptocurrency, whatever, these tools, they're tools. That's not the point. That's not the end game. These are enablers of this new future. There's also a legal framework element. Like if your legal ownership of a community is based in the hands of a few VCs and a few founders, that's a centralized org.
Absolutely.
You know, we see this all the time in Web3. It's like you're a DAO, but you have a C Corp that VCs own. I'm like, how's that work?
Yeah.
Because like, that's fine. I don't know, but it's not Web3. Web3 is a user-owned and controlled internet, and you can't say that people own something with just a governance token or something and then claim that then everybody else owns the value. You know, the investors own the value. It's like, I know why governance tokens exist, and governance is certainly important, but like, I don't think that a community that's just offering governance as value to its members is sustainable, because it's really about economics. If we don't share the economic upside of accruing value to a community, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right. And then from a scalability standpoint, there's a bunch of Web 2 examples I use, but one of them is really easy for most people to understand. Uber spends more money on driver acquisition every year than anything else on their balance sheet, on their income statement, on their P&L.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? Don't they already have all the drivers? but they don't really, because the churn is so high. And then you ask the question, it's like, well, why is the churn so high?
Yeah.
And it's because they're not treated like equals of importance inside the business model. They don't share in any of the value accrual. They don't share in any of the economic upside.
Right.
They get treated like second-class citizens. They're just a means to an end. In some ways, it's kind of like modern day wage slavery. It's like the masters are on the cap table or in the boardroom, and then you're out driving the car around so they get rich, but then you actually contributed to all those metrics that created the value, but you don't get compensated or rewarded for any of that. You're just being paid to do a job. And the same is true for really any organization that has, employees of any sort, right? Whether they're independent contractors like they are in Uber's case, or if they're, direct employees. It's like, we've got to figure out a way to, we always talk about the ownership economy or the ownership mentality, but like, you can't expect people to act like owners if you don't treat them like owners.
Definitely.
So like, it's fascinating to me how little, and then there's the opposite, which is like total anarchy and chaos inside of a DAO, where there's no leadership really. There's no operational execution. There's no real value accrual. There's no real direction, So to me, the genius is in the middle.
Yeah.
You've got to have a good legal strategy, and you've got to have a good economic scaling and accrual strategy, and then a distribution strategy. But you've got to have both the legal and the technical and the kind of economic side. That tokenomics is what we call that in the Web3 space. But like, yeah, you've got to have all three of those, or else you're going to find yourself in trouble at some point at scale. So, and that's what we took 3 years to build before we actually productized anything. We took about 3 years to do the research and legal framing on the employment commons and trying to figure all this out. Because it's like, look, this isn't sustainable. This isn't sustainable. Like, we don't want to just put out a token for no reason, and we don't want to do something that's not compliant, and we don't want to get ourselves in legal trouble because we're dealing with people's employment and their benefits. Like, that's like, you don't mess with that stuff. You can't.
True.
You should not mess with people's employment and benefits. Healthcare and paychecks, as I say, are the two holy of holies of like a person's commercial experience. Don't mess with it.
Yeah.
So we can't take the risks. We can't take those traditional Web3 risks like some people would. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense, and which is, I think, very important. You need to take a step back, dig deep. Are we really decentralizing things? Are we really standing by the ethos of blockchain, or are we just tokenizing it and not doing anything out of it? Which is very important. Completely agree.
Yeah, it's very common, and I think people they think. Well, I've always said that, fear is the enemy of all things great. There's the analogy of the fox and the hare, or the turtle and the hare, the tortoise and the hare, where it's like the hare is really running and he's going and he's trying to get there first, and but he gets tired and he lays down to take a nap, and then the slow plodding tortoise just kind of takes over and beats him to the finish line because he got caught sleeping because he didn't manage his time and resources well. It's not different in Web3. I think there's a lot of false urgency around, oh, we got to launch a token. We got to do this. We got to do that. We got to beat people to and it's like, no. If you have a really smart strategy of protecting the legal, the technological, and the economics of your ecosystem, and you have a really defensible business model that you can scale, that's sticky, that you can really create community network effect around, I'd take the slow route. That's what we did at Opolis 5 years ago. Nobody cared about anything that we were doing. In fact, they're like, payroll, benefits, it's boring, like that's really boring stuff. We still get that sometimes because it's not a DEX or a, smart contract related this and this, It's like some of our core innovations are legal and economics driven, not technical.
Definitely.
Right? And it's just interesting to see. So yeah, I'm not terribly bullish on most of the stuff that I see in crypto, although most of it's net positive. It's kind of advancing the ball, but I don't know how sustainable most of it is. And I'm saying this about some projects that I quite like, but like, I just don't know how it's going to stand up to the test of time.
Right. True. There's another topic that I'd want to discuss with you with regards to co-employment or dual employment. So as we see, right, in the US, the labor standard does allow for co-employment, but that may not be the case in other jurisdictions like Europe or other geographies as yet. So since there is that differing stance across these jurisdictions with regards to co-employment, what is your view on this, and how does Opolis plan to expand across different geographies?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're in the middle of getting more precision around what my answer will be, and probably different in 3 to 6 months. But directionally, every jurisdiction globally has its own set of labor standards. Right. Now, some of those labor standards are copied from other jurisdictions. And so you see a lot of commonalities in the West, for example. The US being sort of on its own with respect to healthcare for the most part. But you know, there's some overlap. The concept that you mentioned called co-employment doesn't exist in everywhere. Right. And in those cases, we would have to set up a different type of organization to house the employment. Now that comes with a significantly more amount of risk, which would probably make the service more expensive in those jurisdictions. Right. So our goal isn't to make, this is a for-profit effort, but it's not about maximizing profit. It's about scaling profit. Like, let's go get 100 million members and take a little bit from everybody. It's kind of like a Netflix strategy more than it is like a traditional payroll company strategy, which is about maximizing all of the money per person. So whatever we end up charging in these jurisdictions that don't have co-employment, that take on more risk, it'll be the minimum that we can get away with charging without, taking on too much risk ourselves. For example, if somebody were to do something on site, we would be the technical employer of these individuals. And as such, the problem is we would have some liability for that entity in that jurisdiction around, if there was some damages or something that happened, or there was some claim that came out of that activity, we could be liable for that. So we'd have to procure different kinds of insurances and different kind of protections to make that happen. Now, these are all things that are doable. They just come at a cost. So the 1% community sustainability fee that we charge here in the US would be very different in these other jurisdictions. It'd be very different. I mean, it could be. There are some South American and Central American jurisdictions that are just ridiculous as far as like how much it costs to do this stuff there. So we might just not go there directly right away. I mean, eventually we'll get there because we'll have enough size to support pretty much any amount of risk, I think, at scale. You can really de-risk yourself quite a bit with 100 million people. And I know it sounds like a lot of people, but it's like, I don't see any reason why we can't have a public utility infrastructure for employment. I mean, we use public utility infrastructures for social media and all sorts of other stuff. Like, why can't we just create, instead of a B2B service, why can't we just create a utility that people can plug into? So anyway, that's what we're going to do. Now, as far as the actual footprint, we're going to start with Canada, Puerto Rico this year, and then we're going to start expanding internationally after that. The goal is to be in 180 jurisdictions within 3 years, and I think we can do it. And then, really the sky's the limit. That's really realizing this vision of working from, where, with whom, and how much you choose, right? Like if you're in, I don't know, Nigeria, and you want to contribute to a project that's got a Swiss association, right? And team is in the US that you support, like there shouldn't be a reason why you can't plug into that and provide your services to that team, or a half a dozen of those situations. You know, in the DAO sense, you could be contributing to a bunch of different places that, you know, why not?
Definitely. And that's how you grow, right? I mean, that's how you set your footprint right in one jurisdiction and then you start expanding. So I'd also like to know a little bit more about maybe the tokenomics of the work token to understand. We definitely understand that work tokens make the system more interactive and engaging by being used in running payrolls or staking tokens, making referrals, and a lot of these other things. So I would like to hear from you on the need of the work token and what further utility do you intend to attach to this token?
Yeah, so there's a few things about the work token that people need to understand that's very important to it. The first is it's a value token. This is not this has rights to community distributions of profits when that time comes. Okay. Now it's like, wait. Most of the time in the US, that's a security, and like people don't want to be dealing in securities because it kind of defeats the purpose of all of this. And it's like, it really should be up to the community. Well, that's why we've used a cooperative legal framework.
Right.
And we don't have people in the community that aren't here to enable and embolden the self-sovereign worker. Most everybody here is a self-sovereign worker, right? They're using the services. So, you know, there's other examples of cooperatives in the US that do things like this. And we're just creating a next generation version of that. So there's a concept in cooperatives called patronage. And so what we've done is we've tokenized patronage. Now, what patronage is, it's the mechanism that cooperatives use to issue dividends to their members, right? So at the end of the year, if we have a big profit, based on your ownership of work tokens, based as a pro rata of the total membership, and on a whitelist, there's a whitelisted membership list of people that own tokens. Then you get your pro rata share of profits.
Right.
So the way that you get tokens is by creating patronage or helping accrue value to the community. And our North Star metric is payroll volume. So we call this ACPV. This is how we generate the community fees. So ACP is annualized commons payroll volume. So currently we're a little over, 45 million or something that we're currently managing. And so 1% of that comes back to the community in fees, and we have to pay all of our operational expenses, and then whatever is left over would be profit. Now we're not profitable right now because we're just not big enough. But eventually this thing really gets profitable. So the idea is you want to consume as much payroll as you can because you're going to earn more tokens for doing that, because that drives the North Star metric up. Right. In addition, referring your friends who also can use the service drives the number up. Right? So you get rewarded for that. They get rewarded for that. So everyone gets rewarded for referrals in the process. And then the tokens are only minted based on growth. So it's not based on time. So a lot of people, even staking is all based on time.
Yeah.
Well, there's no value accrual necessarily to time. So we did it based on growth. And we said, well, look, for every 10% growth, we're going to inflate the token supply by about 1.2%. So it's about 9x. Yeah. So, and that's based on payroll volume, right? So as the payroll volume grows, there's more accrual of value. And then we issue at 10% growth on that payroll number, we issue 5 million new tokens. Now that number stays the same. It just gets, the pro rata is going to shrink as we get bigger. So you want to get in early because there's early adopter rewards that are bigger. And over time, you're going to get less per epoch, but they'll become worth more over time. So there's this inverse relationship. can you imagine what these tokens would be worth at 100 million members if the margin at 1% is 95% margin at scale? I mean, it's going to print money, right? So like you're going to be literally reaping the benefits of these activities in perpetuity so long as we grow. Make sense? So we tried to align the incentives of all of the stakeholders of the community. So if you're a coalition member who's making referrals, but you're not a consuming member, well, your tokens are going to become more valuable the more we grow. So how do we incentivize you to help it grow? Right. So now everybody's incentives is to help the community grow. Instead of, the investors have one set of incentives, the employees have a different set, everybody's got a different thing. We're using the tokenomics as a next generation design to actually align all of the interests so that they're not disparate, right? Because that's why communities fall apart, or even companies fall apart. Look at, like, I'll use the Uber example again. Drivers leave because they don't get taken care of and they don't win in the economics game. So they look for other opportunities to arbitrage their time. If every ride a driver did in the early days represented a share of stock in addition to getting paid, how many of those drivers do you think would stick around if they were continuing to get stock to drive, right? So tokens, especially in the confines of a cooperative legal framework, we think are the next generation of building legitimacy for DAOs and also activating appropriate incentives so that communities can take charge of growing themselves. Because it's not just about, degen economics where it's like, well, it's 12,000% APY and stake your tokens and all this. It's like, but where's the real value? This is just degen stuff, So we're very much in the regen camp, and we're very much in the let's play the long game camp around this, because we don't think that it's good business or makes any sense to play fast and loose with monetary policy and just, make up a bunch of crap that people can point at and laugh at because it's a joke. Dog memes and stuff. It's like, it's all net positive. It's sort of how we got here, because I had to pay attention to that stuff to then envision something better.
Yeah.
Without that stuff, I wouldn't have been inspired to do what I'm doing, right? Because I wouldn't have known what to learn from or what to look at or what to think about. So I don't judge it at all. It's an evolutionary thing. But for me, it really comes down to like, how do we take the next leap into this next iteration of, fully functioning ecosystems, fully regenerative ecosystems that actually accrue value, distribute value, and incentivize ownership and contribution from individuals globally. Like, it's a really powerful thing. And we're so early with it that, like, there's not even a lot of other ecosystems that I can point to.
Absolutely.
To say like, hey, look at this one, and this one. Like, we're literally the first people through the door doing this. And it's like, okay, well, we don't have a playbook to share, except you can look at what we did and we can give you some pointers. But like, I wouldn't even say we're a success yet, because we're not profitable yet. When we're profitable and we're distributing profits and value to our community, then I'll be happy.
Definitely. But I think that's where the actual research comes in play, where you said, right, 3 to 5 years of research that goes in, because you're the early movers in that space. You are realizing, okay, this is the gap that we need to fulfill, and this is how we envision the future. That is where all the hard work and the prior work, which is happening at the back end, comes into play. So I think more than being profitable, it's about making that impact, driving that community behavior, and ensuring that, yes, we are following the ethos of Web3 and decentralization that takes you a long way.
Correct.
So moving on, there has been a lot of discussion and debate around the recent YGG and Merit Circle fiasco. and the termination of their relationship. So Merit Circle members had proposed canceling YGG's investment in the organization because of a lack of perceived added value. On those lines, what is your view on this recent issue? Do you see this inviting a legal scrutiny or a framework in Dows to avoid such cases in the future?
Well, I have a completely different investment theory than most people do, and it's very Web3-ish, but I get accused of being a little Pollyannish about it. I actually think it's bad, well, depending on the terms, but I think it's not a good practice for DAOs to be taking external money where they have different goals and extractive motivations. And so, look, if an entity says that they can't provide value, and I think it's probably best you don't take their money. Most of our investors are very aligned with the future of the self-sovereign worker idea. So I actually screen people out. When we're raising capital, we say, I ask them questions. And what's your Web3 ethos, or what's your Web3 thesis?
Yeah.
And if they can't answer that with some level of conviction or credibility, I'm not really that interested.
Right.
So I don't know. I think we're going to see a pretty seismic shift in the way VCs are approaching. You're already seeing Sequoia putting in a huge fund to invest in tokens, and even Andreessen has $1 billion fund or something for Web3 crypto. And a lot of projects I know are not wanting to take that money anymore because they're so what's Andreessen or these guys going to do? I mean, if they find projects that are happy to create a C Corp and put them on the cap table and then, close the community out of ownership and all that stuff, then what are you building? You're just building a traditional company. So I don't know. I think that, you got to play the long game. I think so many people say well, you got to take the money because you don't know. It's no, find investors that are more aligned with who you are and what you're trying to build. There's a lot of people out there that are very interested in realizing the Web3 vision. I wouldn't say there's a lot of large investors doing that yet, but there's some coming. And if I have anything to do with it, hopefully there'll be some more. Maybe we can convert some more. But I think they're realizing that the old methods of investment aren't going to yield this new crypto future. And in some ways, that's actually bad for their investment.
Right.
Because community is the new IP. If you can't incentivize your community to participate and actually participate as owners in the effort, they're not going to stick around, and that's bad for your investment.
Yeah.
Because then it's just fads. It's just, you see this a lot in the NFT space. You see this a lot in the gaming space. Old school investors are trying to dabble in the Web3 space or the metaverse or whatever. And the communities just aren't having it. They're just yeah, they'll go find something that's more in line with who they are. Now, there are exceptions to that in terms of investment success. Coinbase, from an investment success, is a huge success.
Yeah.
And it, in some ways, enables Web3 because it creates a critical sort of crypto bank infrastructure. But it's not Web3 at all. So if you're going to champion, Coinbase is this big success in the Web3 space, it's not. It's a Web2 company that enables some Web3 things.
Right.
That's it. OpenSea is kind of the same thing. I mean, they've decided to go the route of Andreessen, and I wouldn't be surprised if OpenSea did a public exit. And, publicly traded companies are not Web3. Yeah. Now, you can be the world's largest, NFT marketplace and do a good job at it, but it doesn't make you a Web3 company.
Absolutely.
So Web3 is about social shift. It's a social paradigm. If you're enabling it, sure, I guess that's okay, but I'd rather not do it in an unsustainable way because I could see there being Web3 versions of these coming up and dismantling. any of this market share that these guys have, because the community is just so picky that way. If they have options, they're going to go to that.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like how you put it when you say we need to have that social shift, and you just need not be fast, but you also need to ensure that you're sustainable in the long run. It's not about who runs faster and reaches the goal, but it's about who sticks. That is what we're seeing in these bear markets, right? Who stands the test of times is the infrastructure which is there to stay, which is actually following the ethos of your community. So I would definitely like to dig a little bit deep on DAOs over here. So DAOs, which have been gaining a lot of visibility and are indeed the future of decentralized workflows for protocols. But they're just like there are a lot of essentials for running centralized corporations, making them decentralized, run by the people, involves a lot of key aspects, right? Maybe it could be evaluating your user participation, governance, proposal management, legal frameworks, employee benefits, and a lot of other things. So one part of my question is, what gaps do you see in the current infrastructure of DAOs, and what solutions are needed to solve this? And secondly, how do you see DAOs and the entire Web3 ecosystem evolving maybe in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, it's really two questions, so I'll answer them in order. So the first question is what tools do we need to better operate DAOs? I mean, I think we need everything. I think my opinion is that we're not going to see a fully decentralized operational function inside of a DAO. Okay. I don't think it's possible. And the reason for that is because, without some sort of semblance of like direction, structure, it's anarchy, right? And the personalities are just too different. I've seen so many situations where the intentions are good, but progress isn't made because there's no clear vision, there's no clear leadership, there's no clear anything. Now, I don't think that if there's a operational structure, that it means that it's super hierarchical and it's super controlling and it's antithetical. That operational team can operate on the best interest of a decentralized ownership network. So I think operational execution is going to have to maintain some level of structure, whatever that means. Okay. Now, what we need in terms of tool sets is we need tools that enable this modularity, this flexibility, this invisibility. Most teams are going to be remote, whether it's proposal management or it's voting mechanisms or it's just even, integrated tool sets for DAO operations teams to actually do their work, but do so transparently so the community can kind of see what's going on. These things are all really important. I think the next big push in Web3 is going to be DAO tooling. Because we talk about DAOs, and then the age of DAOs, like 2022 is really in 2021 is the age of DAOs. NFTs were really kind of last year, and this year's going to be DAOs. Maybe, but like without good tooling, creating stickiness, engagement, fulfillment, like just making people feel more organized. Like people don't like feeling disorganized. And even if you're a really sincere DAO contributor, if your DAO is disorganized because of one reason or another, they're going to leave and they're going to go contribute somewhere else. So I think there's a lot of bearishness I've heard on DAOs because, this vision of a fully decentralized autonomous organization is never going to be realized. And I think that's true to an extent. I think if you're going to maintain humans as their input, human relationships are too valuable and human dynamics are too delicate to like completely automate all of this stuff. But what we do need to do is build tool sets around the human frailty components or the human dynamics, and that actually make for better operational execution without recreating traditional just, control-based hierarchies. Now, what does that exactly look like? We're still trying to figure it out too. So we hope to build a blueprint that actually shows DAOs how to do this. Because I don't, I have no interest in being the next Mark Zuckerberg. Like, I don't want that at all. In fact, like a lot of times I kind of, don't want the limelight because I don't want anybody to think that it is about me.
Yeah.
Right. But I also recognize that I'm the visionary behind this stuff, and people are looking to me to provide leadership. So what am I going to do?
Absolutely.
So I'm kind of in a conundrum here. Some people might mistake my leadership for making it about me, but it's not really about me. And I can't care about that. It's just like, whatever, I've got to do it. At some point, like any child you might rear, they're going to be ready to stand on their own 2 feet. So Opolis will be ready to stand on its own 2 feet without me having to lead from the front all the time. At some point, we're just not there yet. So I think DAOs need to be smart about how they come out the gate. I don't think that a simple operations hierarchy and an accountability hierarchy is a bad thing if you expect to execute anything. If you don't care about execution and you've got infinite amounts of money and you're just having fun, then go for it. YOLO. I don't think it matters. But most DAOs aren't operating from that, and they do want to accrue value, and you've got to have good, smart operations leadership to be able to do that. Now, I think where it really gets down is who makes the decisions, governance, and then who owns the economic rights. These are the parts that I think can be decentralized to an extent. I think the operations team needs to have a significant amount of latitude to make operations decisions.
Right.
Because some random DAO member can't possibly know what software is best or what for this or that, right? In voting on those kinds of things isn't. So the people who are responsible for these decisions have to be able to make these decisions in operations. But as far as like vision things or directional things, the community should absolutely have a voice in that.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's a stewardship model like Gitcoin DAO, or it's like what we've also done, which is a stewardship model, or it's some other decentralized voting mechanism. I think there could be a bunch of different experimentation around voting. Like, I don't think Snapshot is the end all be all for DAO voting. I don't think it actually does a very good job at all. But we shall see. So that's what I think about the tools. And I guess I kind of answered the second question too.
Yeah.
And where I think it's going to go, because I don't think anybody really knows yet. I mean, we have an opinion and it might be right. I've been right about quite a few things, but it doesn't mean I'm going to be right on this one. I've been wrong about some things too. So like I could, say it goes 50-50. I'm pretty good with human behavior. And I think that I'm probably closer to the truth than probably away from it. But we still have a lot to unfold and to see. So I think some of it's going to be dependent on what tools emerge. The social dynamics are going to be driven by the tools. So if we've got really good tools that allow for transparency, operational execution, and accountability, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. The thing that I'll comment on is around DAOs. If anybody's watching this is thinking about putting up a DAO, you have to be really careful of your ethos around Web3 on this front, because not having structure is a structure. And there's this thing called the power vacuum or the loudest barking dog. So when you have no structure and no hierarchy, the hierarchy gets filled with those that bark the loudest.
Right.
And the power structure ends up being filled with those people who just happen to be the loudest.
Yeah.
Instead of the most capable. So don't think that you're doing yourself a service by having no structure, and that's going to somehow be, a great model. It's not going to be a great model, and you're going to find out the hard way. So this is why I say you need to have operational structure and accountability and transparency. But how you go about doing that can be very different than what you have in a traditional corporation. It doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
In any case, what you should do is you should treat it like any other startup. And that's that you need to have a core team. Even if you have 2,000 DAO members, you need to have a core team that's being reasonably compensated, whether that's tokens or whatever, that is focused and they understand what they're accountable for. And they understand how they're going to be held accountable and what transparency is going to be around their work.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, you're going to regret it, because you can't just expect people to know what to do. I've been naive in this way before too. So like, I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody. I'm actually saying I've done some of this, and like, it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Just because you've got a great vision and a great opportunity and a great idea doesn't mean everyone's going to understand it. And that doesn't mean that people are going to be able to execute it without guidance and without structure around it. So operational execution needs structure. The ownership should absolutely be distributed. I recommend cooperative law to use if you're going to like get really serious about like being legitimate and like being recognized into the future. Because I worry about, just ethereal orgs with, completely ethereal tokens and their legitimacy in and around exchanges. And there's just a lot of gray area. So like, you get my point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're very right when you say that, yes, there's a lot to be unfolded, to be unleashed as we go the way, and keeping operational excellence, transparency, and accountability at the forefront is going to lead us to success in building proper DAOs which are needed. Absolutely.
100%. And DAOs are just getting started. So anybody who thinks, the great DAO experiments failed, like everybody said that about Bitcoin. They said that about Bitcoin. They said it about Ethereum. They said, it's like, guys, do you guys not pay attention to like the cycles of things? Like, this isn't going anywhere. I mean, there was social anthropologists that said the internet would never amount to anything but, like silly things that don't matter. And it's like, look, our phones, our lives are connected to the internet now. The internet, can you imagine a life without internet now?
Absolutely.
No, it's going to be the same way for DAOs and crypto. They just don't know it yet. And people that are that bearish on it, I just don't get it, because it's like, you think it's just tech or some cute stuff. No, this is social paradigm stuff. And so was the internet. The internet created a whole new social paradigm, not always for good. This is going to be a much better iteration of V1 of the internet, in my opinion.
Definitely. And I think it's going to be very, very exciting to see how we unknowingly transition into the social paradigm. And then we take a step back, start questioning ourselves. Okay, similar to how we were talking about the internet, we're in that phase now. We're talking the same thing about DAOs. Are we really able to survive without this decentralization workflow? I think that's what the future holds, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agree.
Definitely. I think that there's so much that I've learned from you, and I really wouldn't stop the conversation to go on, but in the interest of time, I would, on that note, would really like to thank you for spending time with us today, sharing some very useful insights with us. Opolis is doing some great work in positioning itself as the next generation employment ecosystem for the self-sovereign worker. We are really excited to see how you're aiming to build the future of employment with decentralized employment organizations, ensuring that, yes, operational excellence, transparency, as well as accountability is maintained. We wish you all the very best for the continued growth of Opolis. Thank you once again for being a part of CuratedX and for this enriching conversation, John.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, and you too.